verse number 14 through verse number 22 is what we're going to look at today. So the last time that we talked, we went over Noah and his walk with God, right? The conditions of the world that Noah was living in. Now we'll go through a little bit of the ark today. So we'll cover kind of basically just the size, the capacity that the ark would have had for basically the physical safety of all of the things that are included in the ark. And so, and we'll look at some of the dichotomy, right? There are ways in which the ark is an acceptable example maybe of salvation in some terms, but I think my personal opinion is that it's not a great example of the salvation of a believer. It's a better picture of the physical, God's physical protection of believers. And so that's, you don't have to see it that way. It really doesn't matter to me, but that's just kind of my take on it. So we talked about Noah's walk with God. We see that in verse 8, 9, and 10. Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man, perfect in his generation. Noah walked with God, and Noah begat 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. These 3 verses right here, well, really this verse right here, is one of the reasons that I don't think that the ark is is a great example of salvation, right? Because Noah was already just, he was already perfect in his generation, was already walking with God before he ever got on the ark. So what would that make? That would mean that Noah was saved before he was saved, right? And so, which, by the way, is exactly the way that people that have a reformed view of theology, of soteriology, which is the doctrine of salvation, that's what they believe. They believe that you're saved before you're saved, right? That God has to come in and that God regenerates you before you place your faith in him. That's how they believe that salvation takes place. And so that's one of the reasons that this is used by so many theologians and writers of commentaries to give an example of soul salvation versus physical salvation. They use it as an example of soul salvation because so many of them come from that background. And so they're attributing all of Noah's actions prior to him actually getting on the ark. They are attributing all of those actions to God regenerating him prior to his faith. So anyways, we looked at 4 things about Noah's walk, right? We looked at the start of his walk, how he began to walk with God, the sanctification of his walk, that Noah was just, right? Which means basically Noah did the right thing, right? He was perfect in his generation, which means that he was an all-around Christian, right? We interpret the word perfect by our present-day means, and to us, perfection means perfection, right? And so to us, perfection means without flaw. That's what we think perfection means. But in the Bible, that's not what perfection is. That's not the meaning of perfection in the Bible. In the Bible, the meaning of perfection is complete or total or whole. And so he was a whole individual, right? Is what the Bible tells us about him. And so we looked at some specifics about his walk with God, and then, of course, the secret of his walk with God. Noah, the world before, we looked at the world before the flood in Noah's day, and it was quite the mess, right? Chapter 6 here, verse 11, 12, and 13. The earth also was corrupt before God. And the earth was filled with violence. God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. And God said unto Noah, the end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth. So the wickedness that existed prior to the flood is documented very well in these verses, and God pronounces a judgment against it. There's a sharp contrast, right, between the life of Noah and the lives of those around Noah, right? God sums it up here in this verse by telling them that all flesh has come before God and that there's nothing in them. They're just violent, right? And so he says, he uses these words, I will destroy them with the earth, right? And so sometimes we read those words and we say that that was God saying he was going to destroy the earth as well as the people. But what it is it's kind of like saying, I'm going to hit that with a bat, right? You're not saying you're going to hit that and the bat, right? God destroyed the people with the earth. He used the earth to destroy them, right? And so that is exactly what God does. Noah's world was a depraved world, right? There was great depravity in Noah's world, and the world of Noah, the Bible tells you, was two things, right? To sum it all up, God tells you that it was corrupt, right? There was no justice in Noah's world. It was a world that was full of corruption. We are speeding towards that, right, in our present day and age. Seems like at every turn we're seeing that man is corrupt. I guess what's kind of surprising to me is that we're still surprised by it, right? We still act surprised when we find out that somebody's corrupt, and I'm not sure that I understand why we still act surprised. I mean, even me, right? I'll hear about somebody, and I'm like, wow, I can't believe that guy did that, you know? And then when you really sit back and think about it, you're like, well, of course, right? We're a bunch of messed up, broken human beings. And we are capable of all kinds of evil things, right? And so it is a corrupt world. And then the second way that God describes the world of that time was that it was full of violence. It was a cruel world, right? They were uncaring about other individuals, other people. And we are quickly becoming that way as well. And what's, I think, interesting about some of the cruelty and violence of our present day and age is that it's being done in the name of gentleness and kindness and tolerance, right? We're committing all kinds of atrocities in the name of tolerance. And I think I don't think obviously that it's a good thing. And so we live in a very, very cruel world. It should upset us as believers that the world is as corrupt as it is, and is as cruel as it is. It should not surprise us, right? But it should upset us, and it should make us go to our knees, right? And pray to our Heavenly Father for relief from the corruption of this world and the cruelty of this world. Egypt, right, in Israel's days, Egypt becomes this same picture, right? It becomes a microcosm, a small picture of what the world was, right? When Moses' grandfather dies, right, or step-grandfather, I guess would be a better way of putting it. When his step-grandfather dies and the new Pharaoh comes in, it's not good, right? An interesting thing about even that, right, is the fact that that the Pharaoh, the people around the Pharaoh, his counselors tell him what about the nation of Israel? They're more than us, and they're mightier than us, and we better do something, and we don't want them to overthrow us, right? What if another nation attacks and they join them? They'll overthrow us. They're stronger than we are, right? Which tells you what? If Israel would have just seen themselves as what they were before God, Israel never would have ended up in bondage. They ended up in bondage because they were blinded to, right, to their capability, basically, I guess would be the best way of putting it. But Anyway, so the world was a messed up place, full of corruption and cruelty, and and so God says that He's going to destroy it. So the decree that comes for Noah's world from God, right, is that He's going to wipe them out. He's going to destroy them. He's going to use the earth to destroy the people that are on the earth, which is exactly what God does. And just the couple of little hurricanes that we've seen go through Florida and through North Carolina and stuff, just absolutely wipe out entire cities, entire areas, right? Listen, God, if God chooses, right, God can wipe this thing off the face of us off the face of the map. We are not a sturdy species by any stretch of the imagination. We are very weak. We do not have very many capabilities, right? Your greatest capability as a human being is our ability to think and plan ahead. That's really the key thing that separates us from nature. Right, is our ability to think. It's our only protection against nature is our ability to think and plan ahead. Because you don't have teeth to go after, right? If a lion attacks you, you're not going to bite its jugular vein out. You're not even going to get through its skin. Right? So we are not a very sturdy species. But anyway, so God's decree from the throne in heaven is to wipe mankind off the face of the planet. And that is exactly what God does. He wipes mankind off the face of the planet. And so just the little hurricanes that we saw, right? I think the actual surge from the first hurricane, I want to say they said was 4 or 5 feet. Was the surge off the first hurricane, and they were thinking off of Milton that it was going to be somewhere between 6 and 8 feet, right? Just that little bit, right, was able to kill people, drown people, wipe people's their homes off the map, right? And God buried this thing. It buried everything on the face of this planet, including the highest mountain, underwater. You know who survived that? Nobody. That's who survived it, right? Just Noah and his family. So Noah's work for God. God gives Noah very detailed instructions concerning his plan to build the ark. Here's one of the reasons that I don't think that the attempt to use the ark as a picture of salvation is a great thing, because God gives Noah details about how to build the ark, but who has to build it? Noah. So that's akin to saying this, right? Salvation is God gives you the plan. All you got to do is work it. All right? You just work hard enough for long enough. Hey, and eventually you'll have an ark that'll take you home to glory. Hallelujah, praise God. All right? It's one of the reasons I don't think that it's a great picture of salvation. It's a great picture of the salvation of God from the physical, dangers that we face as believers on the face of this planet. It's a great picture of that. That if you'll trust God and work the plan, God takes care of his people. Right? He won't sink your ship. So anyways, he says the plan is the ark, right? That's God's plan. And so here's the beginning of God's plan here, verse 14, verse 15. Make thee an ark of gopher wood. Rooms shalt thou make in the ark, and shalt pitch it within and without with pitch. And this is the fashion which thou shalt make of it. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits, the breadth of it 50 cubits, the height of it 30 cubits. That's a big boat, all right? So master plan for the ark, right, is that God said, right? God's the master planner. This was not Noah's ark. This is God's ark, right? Noah is an instrument in the hand of God, but the ark this is God's project, not Noah's. It's a good thing for us to remember sometimes that that we are a part of God's project. We aren't the project. We're not the master planner. We're not charged, right? We're not the one that needs to come up with the plan. Actually saw an interview with a guy earlier this week, and he's a musician. And he said, he said, teenagers ask me all the time, right? Hey, when did you realize that it was God's will for you to be a musician? He said, he says, they always look shocked when I tell them that's not God's will for me. He says, how horrible would it be if that was God's will for me? He says, what happens if I get in a car accident and, right, something happens to, right, my vocal box, now I can't sing? Does that mean I miss out on God's will? He says, that's not God's will for me. He says, what happens if something happens to my hands, I get severe arthritis or something like that, I can no longer play a guitar? Does that mean now I'm no longer doing God's will? He says, God's will, there's a lot of things in the scripture that are God's will for you, but he goes, the concept that a career path is God's will for your life is just crazy to me, he said. He said, what if you get fired from the career path that God chose for you? Now all of a sudden you're not able to ever do God's will? Right? He says there's a lot of things in the Bible that are God's will for your life, but that's not one of them, right? Sometimes we got the idea that, right, we're in charge of trying to, right, work out the plan for our life and, right, set the course. God's in charge of this thing, right? You're an instrument in God's hand. And if you'll be a willing instrument in God's hand, God will use you like he did Noah. And in using you like he did Noah, what ends up happening when Noah builds the ark is Noah ends up inside of God's plan, right? Safe and secure. It's the way it works in our lives as believers too. So anyways, God designs it, but reveals it to Noah, right? And the ark is basically it's a picture of God's wisdom, right? Of God's compassion. The ark reveals a bunch of things about the characteristics of God. I mean, if you really sat down and put your mind to it for, right, a few minutes, imagine the number of things you could come up with that the ark reveals about God, the characteristics of God, right? God came up with a boat big enough to fit everything that he needed to fit on it, right? To rescue every species on the face of the planet. Every walking thing, right? Everything that lives on the ground, God rescued via the ark. Right? God came up with all that, right? It shows God's compassion because God loved mankind enough to not wipe them completely off the face of the earth to save Noah. Right? There's many things that the ark reveals about God. The main thing that it reveals about God, though, is this, that God is a master planner, and he knows he's got a plan, right? Your choice is not what the plan is. Your choice is whether you want to participate in God's plan or not. All right? Depending on your theological background, some people don't think that you don't have a choice about participating in God's plan. But the reality of the matter is you get to choose whether you want to be used as, right, in God's plan, right? Whether you want to make yourself available to God, for God to use as he works things out on the face of this planet. And yes, God can use your rebellion, right? We see God use the rebellion of the nation of Israel in some places and others. So God can even use your rebellion from time to time. But the reality is what you really want, right, is you want to be Noah. You want to be used in God's plan, right, to save mankind alive, right? And in verse 14 there, he tells you the meaning basically of the ark, right? The word ark would later be used to describe a smaller vessel, right? That's what Moses is put in. Moses is put in an ark too, right? It's used to describe a much smaller vessel, but it appears that the word ark, right, is derived from an Egyptian word, which meant box or chest. Looks like that's where the word ark comes from. And since Moses is the writer of the first 5 books of the Bible, he would probably have been relatively fluent in Egyptian, right, having grown up in Pharaoh's house. And so that's the word that is used for ark, which is one of the reasons that whenever you see a picture of the ark, right, it always looks like a big oblong box, right? It looks like a big shoebox. And so That's part of the reason for that. The materials God says to use to build this ark, right? He tells them to use gopher wood. The word gopher is actually a transliteration of a Hebrew word, right? In fact, it's the only occurrence of that word in the Bible. We don't know where it comes from, right? But what we do know is this, that it was the right wood for the job, right? What that means is it would have been a very dense wood of some kind. The reason we know that is because for centuries they built ships with wood, and the wood they used to build those ships was very dense wood. All right? And so it's really only steel. Steel's only been around for a couple of centuries now, and we've used that. The sealant that was used was pitch. That would have been a form basically of what we nowadays would call tar. And so a lot of recent experience, right, indicate that putting a coat of resin would have not only made the boat waterproof, but it also would have made the wood stronger in case of impact with things, right? Which you'd guess it probably impacted some things when water started shooting up out of the ground, right? So probably got tossed around like a pinball for a little bit. All right, it had to have been some rough water, right, when the flood originally hits. And so a lot of critics have got a lot to say, right, about the ark and the Genesis account of it. And so they'll make claims, right? Modern day pitch is made from petroleum. They wanted to use petroleum or had petroleum, right? But listen, for centuries, they used pine resin and charcoal in Europe for pitch, right? So you get a lot of people, they look at Scripture, right, from our present day and age, and they see things from our angle back, right, and from basically our known and recorded history, and they make all their decisions based on that rather than on what the reality may have been or even the possibilities are, right? Listen, we know that the Vikings sailed across the oceans, right? And before there was petroleum resin, right? Listen, the reality is sometimes critics shoot themselves in the foot, right, with that kind of stuff. So the same word that is used here for pitch is also very frequently in the Old Testament translated as atonement or as a covering, right? So what that tells you is it wasn't like wasn't like laying bricks, right? He wasn't putting pitch in between these pieces of wood. That was not the concept. He coated the entire outside of the ark in this stuff, right? And so the entire ark was covered in pitch. So he was covering it inside and out, right? So there had been quite a barrier of protection right across the entire ark. So there's I think it's Morris that said, just as tar covered the ark, kept the inhabitants of the ark safe through the flood of divine judgment, so blood keeps the soul safe from the judgment of God on sin, right? And so the measurements of the ark, right? The ark was an ocean liner-sized vessel, right? Sometimes we just see these little, right, cartoon arks, right? Because about the only time that we really talk about Noah's Ark is when we're talking to kids, right? God told Noah to build him an arky, right? And so that's about the only time usually we really talk about Noah's Ark. But Noah's Ark has a lot of implications for us if we look at it, right, from the angle of God keeping you safe, not only from the evil of this world, but keeping you safe from his judgment on the evil of this world. Right? So a lot of times people use the ark just pretty specifically to try to push an angle, right, of just salvation, right? That being in the ark is akin to being in Christ and that kind of thing. I don't have a problem with that, but I think there's much greater detail, right, and to the story of Noah's Ark, when you look at it from the angle of, this is God saying, look, I could judge this world and not touch a single Christian on the planet. Right? I could wipe every person off the face of this world and leave only Christians if I wanted to. Right? So sometimes we get this idea in our head, right? Like right now we're in the middle of a big political season, right? If we don't vote in the right president, then us as Christians, man, we're going down. Maybe. Isn't it also possible, though, that we could get the worst president in the history of the United States, and God could just put his people in an ark to keep them safe? Isn't that possible, too? Right? So, anyways, the ark was quite the build, right? I'll tell you this, nobody had seen anything like it up to that period of time. Morris says it was designed for capacity and floating stability rather than for speed and navigation, right? So the definition of a cubit, the Bible, right, gives us a cubit was approximately 18 inches long, right? Everybody talks about a cubit being from the elbow to the fingertips. It's a relatively accurate view of it, right? The ark would have been 300 cubits long, then 50 cubits wide, 30 cubits high. What that means is it would have been 138 meters in length, 23 meters in height, 14 meters, or 23 meters wide, 14 meters high. In feet, that's 450 feet, 75 feet wide and 45 feet high. Right? That's a lot of space. Right? That's almost 45,000 meters of space, right? Cubed meters, basically. So to put all that in perspective, that's the equivalent to about 340 semi-trailers. So the ark would have been wider than a 6-lane freeway, right? 340. If you took semi-trailers, right, put them 6 wide, right? That's a lot of room, right? It's a lot of space to be putting stuff in. So it was quite the build there. So the ark's carrying capacity, right, would have been. Morris says the volumetric capacity of the ark is equal to the volumetric capacity of 522 standard livestock cars, such as are used on modern American railroads. It sits in stone that about 240 sheep can be transported in one stock car. A total of over 125,000 sheep would have been able to be carried in the ark. Right? So people say, all right, so how are you going to fit all the animals on the face of the planet? Elephants, giraffes, right? Rhinos, all this stuff. How are you going to fit them all on the ark? Well, when you really comes down to it, there's not as many big animals as you think there are. First of all, the biggest animals on the face of the planet are where? They're in the ocean, right? They don't walk on land. And so, but in fact, fun fact, right? The average size of an animal on the ark, if you took all of the sizes of the animals on the ark and you averaged that size, it would have been the average size of an animal on the ark would have been a rat. That would have been the average size, right? Most animals are smaller, not bigger. And so sometimes we get the idea, right, that it's really hard to fit all those animals on that ark. It's not as hard as everybody thinks it is, right? So anyways, this was a seaworthy vessel, all right? Shipbuilders have discovered that the best dimensions for a floating vessel are a length 10 times its height and 6 times its width, which is what? Exactly the dimensions that the ark was. Almost like God knew something, huh? So if you've ever been, right, seen one of these big boats that carries shipping containers across the ocean, that's exactly how they're built. They're built the same way the ark was built, right? We've got a lot of technology that goes along with it, right? Anti-sway technology, stuff like that, right? About most of a boat that is below the water line that you see is actually, there's water in there, right? That's what keeps the boat from rocking. right? Is the water that's inside that boat doesn't move at the same pace as the water that's outside the boat, and it gives it stability, right? So, anyways, the ark was quite the vessel, right? And we'll give you here's some of the particulars about the ark, right? He tells you in verse, make the ark of gopher wood. No rooms shalt thou make in the ark, and shalt pitch it within and without with pitch, right? Tells you in verse 16, a window shalt thou make in the ark, and in a cubit shalt thou finish it above, and the door of the ark shalt thou set in the side thereof, with lower, second, third stories shalt thou make it. Right? So we know that the ark was at least 3 stories. We also know there was rooms built into the ark, right? So the rooms would have referred to basically chambers, right? And so the word that is translated as rooms here is also translated elsewhere as nests. Right? So these chambers would have been for Noah, for his family, right? And for keeping the animals separate in, basically. So I'm sure that God gave, right, special grace in this situation and that kind of thing, but you certainly would not want to put, right, a lion in the same room as a lamb, right? Or just let them run wild on the boat, right? Would have been pretty disorganized. Then, of course, there was also a window. It tells you here, right? It looks like from the construction, right, that Morris says, although the phraseology is difficult, most authorities understand that this window was to consist of a 1 cubit opening extending all around the ark's circumference near the roof as a provision for light and ventilation. Right? So sometimes we say, right, in fact, almost every picture you've ever seen of Noah on the ark is a window that's about this big, right? He's leaning out it, letting a dove go. Could you imagine what that ark would have smelled like if that's the way that was? Right? That would not have been I would not have wanted to live on that ark, and neither would have you, right? So basically what most historians say is that when we read that window, it's actually basically it would have been like a skylight that went all the way around the exterior of the ark on the top level, right, to allow light in, and it also would have vented stuff out. And if constructed with a proper eave, right, you wouldn't have had to worry about water getting in or anything else. Right? So it allowed for all of that kind of stuff. Then the Bible tells you that there was a door put in the ark as well. We hear a lot about this door, right? The fact that, right, Jesus is the door, right? That kind of stuff. Whenever this is used as a salvation passage by people or to preach a salvation message, that's how they always use the door. I don't think it's a poor use of the door. I think it's perfectly acceptable use of the door. And the fact that the door is closed by God, right? A lot is made of that, and I think that it is. I think there's a fuller meaning to the text, right? When this is God shutting the door to keep you safe, right, from His judgment coming for the world outside. Right? As a believer, God has always constructed, right, safeguards for His people. Even when you go back to the Old Testament, right, and the nation of Israel is being judged. And yes, do some of the people that were a part of the nation of Israel that weren't responsible for the judgment, right, did they have to suffer, right, by being, right, a part of that judgment? Yes, but if you look, right, what does God do for Daniel? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and Daniel. What happens to those 3? Right, those 4 that choose God over, right, the things of this world. What happens? Well, God takes great care of them, doesn't He? What happens with Joseph? Joseph's second in command. So is there suffering in the life of the believer? Yes, but the suffering in the life of the believer is nothing compared to the suffering in the life of the unbeliever. Right? And it's nothing compared to the suffering in the life of the believer who chooses to rebel against God. Right? So anyways, and then we see that it had decks as well. It would have had 3 levels. This would have made the best, right, use of the space inside of the ark. Basically, they say that the deck area of the ark would fit 22 basketball courts. Right? So I think that's probably plenty of space to fit everything. passengers for the ark, right? Verse 17, 18, 19, and 20 here. He says, and behold, I, even I, do bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh, wherein is the breath of life from under heaven, and everything that is in the earth shall die. But with thee will I establish my covenant. Thou shalt come into the ark, thou and thy sons, and thy wife, and thy sons' wives with thee. And every living thing of all flesh, two of every sort, shalt thou bring into the ark to keep them alive with thee. They shall be male and female. Fowls after their kind, of cattle after their kind, of every creeping thing of the earth after his kind, two of every kind, of every sort shall come unto thee to keep them alive. Right? So the first thing that God chooses to save, right, and the first thing, in fact, that God mentions in the list of everything that he's going to save is man. God's going to save mankind. He's going to save mankind via Noah. He's going to establish a covenant with Noah as well. And so that covenant was established with Noah. That covenant was represented, right, by the rainbow, which has been hijacked in our present day and age by groups that are very anti-Christian things and anti-God, right? And more power to them, right? I don't think it's a good idea to throw the very sign that God said would be a sign that I won't judge the earth like this again. You probably don't want to throw that in God's face, because the next time that he judges the earth, it won't be with just a physical death. When he judges the earth the next time, there's a spiritual component coming to it as well. So anyways, the only 8 souls that were saved in the ark, right, was Noah. The only 8 souls saved in the ark is an encouragement to those who have labored diligently and faithfully in God's service but see very few results. Right? So many judge the success of the Christian life on the basis of numbers. So if one is not getting numbers, he is often tempted to resort to fleshly means to obtain them in order to demonstrate success in the work. We have many today who are criticizing and rejecting God's methods of preaching and praying in favor of worldly methods to fill the church, but we are told to adapt to the culture. Thankfully, Noah did not adapt to his culture. The culture was the reason for the flood, right? And listen, we should not adapt to the culture. That doesn't mean that that everything in the culture, right, is that we have to be different than every little thing in the culture, right? None of us are different than every little thing in the culture, right? Your neighbor wears a shirt just like you do, right? So, right, that's not the point of that. But there are things that in the culture that we certainly should not be willing to bend or to break, right, or to dip our sails in order to attract people. Because in the attracting of those types of things, right, and in the doing of those types of things to attract people, you end up not attracting people who are after God. You end up attracting people who are after some fleshly thing, right? And it's never positive. And so we ought to take a stand for the things that are right. Listen, the devil wants you to change, right? He wants you to dip your sails, and the devil will very often use cultural pressures to do that, right? We live in a day and age where you get a lot of cultural pressure, especially right in our present day and age. Almost all of it seems to be around really the LGBTQ kind of thing, right? It seems to be where we get the most pressure in our present day and age to dip our sails, right? We ought not give into that pressure. We ought not give into the pressure, by the way, from the far right side of it either. That somehow, right, that those people are beyond the help of God. And they should be avoided, right, like they have leprosy. I don't think that's acceptable either. Right? We shouldn't dip our sails and say, listen, it doesn't matter, right, gender is a construct and all that other stuff. We shouldn't dip our sails and say that by any stretch of the imagination, right? But the other side of it is we also shouldn't dip our sails and say, well, if that's the life you've chosen, then God has removed, right, his hand from, God's not extending his hand to you, right? Or even, and I know you can say, well, I don't think anybody actually says that. No, but we act that way. very often comes out in our reactions, right, to people that have got who are in that world, right? Very often comes out in our reaction to them, and I don't think that that's acceptable either. I think we need to be faithful to the message of the gospel. The message of the gospel is that there's not a single person that is drawing breath that is beyond God's ability to save. End of story. Long as you're breathing, you could get saved. You have to have some very strange theological views to believe that there's anybody standing on the face of this planet right now who is beyond the ability of God to save them. We are the instrument that God has chosen to reach this world with. Right? I saw a meme yesterday. It had a bracelet that said WWJD on it. Then it had another bracelet with a bunch of letters on it. And the top one said, "What would Jesus do?" And the bottom one said, "Jesus probably wouldn't have gotten himself in this mess in the first place." Right? And so, but listen, the reality is, right, we should respond to people like Christ would respond to people. There was no people that Christ was not willing to go to. He preached in the synagogue, and he preached on the street corner. Right? There's no people that we should be unwilling to go to, too. Right? And so, anyways, the animal life was spared, obviously, as well. And so, why was the animal life spared, right? Well, why was the animal life punished? Why was the animal life spared? All that other stuff, right? Listen, you realize if God had not brought animals on the ark, that man wouldn't have survived when he got off the ark. Man wanted to survive the time on the ark. Right? I'll tell you this, right? Noah's probably the best case against being a vegan, because I promise you Noah wasn't eating salad on the ark. All right? Anyways, I've got more to say about vegans than the LGBTQ, to be honest with you. But anyways, right? So he's told exactly how many of each animal to bring. Right? It's to bring them 2 by 2. We all know that. And obviously, the 2 by 2 meant that he needed 1 male and 1 female. Seems like that'd go without saying, but God chose to put it in there, doesn't it? You'd think to yourself, right? You'd have been able to figure that one out, wouldn't you? Yep, you would have been able to figure it out until 2024, and so God had to put it in there, right? And then God says, right, the kinds, right, which would have been fowl, right, cattle. The Bible puts it this way: every creeping thing, right, on the earth. So anything that was in the air, anything that was on the ground, had to go in the ark, right? All the rest of it, right, anything that was in the water could survive. But everything that was that needed ground had to get in the ark, right? So what does that tell you? It tells you that there's a lot of variety of dogs, right? But there was only 2 dogs brought on the ark, right? And so that's kind of where it all comes down to, right? Performance and relation. We'll close with this. He says, "Thus did Noah according to all that God commanded, so did he," right? So the Bible tells you, right, that Noah did exactly, right, what God told him to do. And because Noah did what God told him to do, right, Noah and his family are safe on the ark. The animals end up safe on the ark, right, and mankind continues to propagate, right, and move forward. But none of us sitting here would be here now if Noah hadn't chose to obey God, right? So his obedience to God was important. Our obedience to God is important as well. So we'll cut off there. We'll be back in here in about 10 minutes.